All right, everybody. Today we are going to talk about mass-loaded vinyl, or MLV, versus green glue and drywall together, and which option is better for soundproofing. And what I've kind of done in my research is go through and explain what MLV is, how it's used for soundproofing, and its cost and some of the pros and cons with it, as well as the same exact thing for green glue with drywall, how it works, the cost, and so forth. So if you're interested in going in depth and getting a really practical video about which is better, or maybe using both at the same time, I'm going to try to tell you what I've learned. And just as a disclaimer up front, in my own home studio that I built that is soundproof, I chose to use the green glue and drywall, so I am a little bit biased, but hopefully that will also give you the idea that I have done this before, I know what I'm doing, and I got great results. And I think, honestly, mass-loaded vinyl, you could also get some good results with that too, so I'm going to try my best to be unbiased in this video. Before we jump in, I just want to say that I do have a free soundproofing course below in the notes. So if you are on this soundproofing journey like I was 2 years ago, I know how complicated it can be. So this course will help you get a firm grip and understanding on how to soundproof your home studio. And without further ado, let's jump in. All right, to start with, what in the world is mass-loaded vinyl, or MLV for short? Anyways, I was kind of confused as well, but I'm going to give you my very simple definition, not going into how it's made, but essentially it's a synthetic material that comes in rolls, and it was made originally in the 1960s as a way to help with soundproofing offices, homes, and also studios and home theaters, things like that. It's relatively affordable, relatively easy to use because it does come in these rolls of different weights and sizes, so you can custom fit it to any soundproofing job that you need. Next, how does MLV actually soundproof? So MLV is a rather heavy material, so it helps on the side of things with soundproofing where you need mass to help with reducing the amount of sound that can come through your wall. The other thing about MLV is that it is a dampening agent and can help with reducing sound that hits it, and it gets transferred to the material but doesn't actually transfer through it to your next material, which would most likely be drywall, and then into your room. So this is an important aspect of soundproofing, is that not only do we want something that's really massive and heavy, but we also want a material that can reduce the amount of sound that's actually traveling through by creating what's known as dampening. So it does those two things, which I will say later, that's exactly what green glue does as well, but it's a slightly different material, and so in that sense, it will do something different than just green glue at the same time. Next, I want to talk about how much does mass-loaded vinyl cost. So when you're getting the 1 pound mass-loaded vinyl, it can cost anywhere from $1 to $3 per square foot, and if you buy it at volume, it can cost as cheap as 60 cents per square foot. Now, as soon as you jump up to 2 pounds per square foot, which is the heaviest option that most suppliers provide, it's going to cost a bit more, in the range of $2 to $3 per square foot. And that $2 range is only if you get it in bulk as well. So more like $3 per square foot for the 2 pound. And if I was soundproofing my own home studio, I would definitely opt for the heaviest option, since, like I said before, mass is one of the most important parts of soundproofing. So I would want to make sure that I was getting the heaviest possible one, therefore the more expensive one, unfortunately. Lastly, I want to talk briefly about how to install this mass-loaded vinyl so you can kind of get a concept of how it works versus the green glue and the drywall. Again, I did not do this myself, but in my research, it does seem fairly straightforward. Essentially, it does come in these long rolls, so you can actually roll it out and hang it directly on your open studs, with insulation in there, and nail them into the studs every 8 inches, or use some industrial level, construction level staples with a stapler gun. So in that sense, it's actually fairly easy to install. You can custom cut it with an X-Acto knife, and any sort of wall size that you have, whether you have really tall walls or slightly shorter walls, that can be helpful, whereas drywall only comes in one size. So that is the quick rundown of how to install it. Very, very quick. Like I said, I did not do this myself, but you can get an idea for how you would actually install it in your soundproofing situation. So next I want to jump into green glue and drywall, which is what I used in my home studio. So I will go a little more in depth with this and try to show you the pros and cons of each. All right, so let's jump into the green glue section. All right, so green glue is also a dampening agent. And the way that it is used is that you actually squirt it onto the back of your second layer of drywall. So you can see in this video of us in the studio, we're actually using a special dispenser. You suck the green glue up out of a pail. You can also get these in like smaller tubes that you could use like a caulk gun with, but we decided since we're doing a full room that we wanted to get the pail. It was more cost effective. And you squirt it on in an S shape, 2 S shapes, try to fill up as much space on the back of the drywall as you can, and then you push it onto your first layer of drywall. And what this does is it creates a small barrier and between the 2 layers of drywall that creates that dampening effect where sound comes through your first layer of drywall but then is dissipated through the green glue before entering the second layer. So you're getting better frequency reduction across the spectrum when you're adding the green glue versus just having 2 layers of drywall alone. So mass loaded vinyl and green glue, in a lot of ways, they're doing a similar thing in that regard. I want to actually read exactly what it says on the green glue website so you can get a better idea as well. So it says, green glue is a dampening product that dissipates structural vibrations caused by sound waves that travel through ceilings, walls, and floors. So in essence, that's kind of what I just said, but they said it more eloquently than I did. Next, I want to talk a little bit about how much does green glue cost, and then we can sort of relate it back to the cost of mass-loaded vinyl. So green glue, on average, is 75 cents per square foot. If you buy the pails, it could be a little bit cheaper versus buying the actual tubes. It's a little more expensive, but if you average those two out, you get to that 75 square foot range. The cost of drywall is roughly $2.36 per square foot. The reason I'm bringing in drywall is because to compare mass-loaded vinyl and green glue directly, you have to factor in the fact that green glue alone isn't really doing anything to soundproof your studio. So you actually need to use green glue with drywall for it to actually function. Otherwise, it's just a glue and that's about it. So when I factor this in, I'm considering that you're using 2 layers of drywall and assuming that a normal room is going to have drywall regardless. So if you had mass-loaded vinyl with drywall, and then if you had an extra layer of drywall with green glue, it's a somewhat fair comparison for understanding the cost involved with your studio. So now that I've said all that, the total cost of your green glue and drywall would then be $3.11. If we go back, we remember that for the mass-loaded vinyl, our average cost was around $3 if we went with a 2-pound mass-loaded vinyl. So for a direct comparison there, the green glue option is 11 cents more expensive per square foot than mass-loaded vinyl. However, I will say that if you're doing about 200 to 300 square feet, you're looking at like $20 to $30 extra here. So really nothing that's going to hurt the bank overall. They really are roughly the same cost, relatively speaking. The next thing I wanted to compare, and I was thinking about this and I was like, okay, so if they're roughly the same cost, what else could we look at that would make one better than the other? And that would go to weight. I figured that mass-loaded vinyl at 2 pounds per square foot is still pretty heavy, but I wanted to understand how much the drywall would weigh as well. So assuming that we have that extra layer of drywall, if you're not going the mass-loaded vinyl route, that new drywall piece would come in at 2.31 pounds per square foot. So again, pretty close, but I think that added 0.3 pounds over the entire structure would add up to a lot more weight overall that is blocking out sound. So in my opinion, actually the drywall is heavier and therefore maybe a better material. But before making these huge assumptions, I want to look at some of the data that we have as well. So let's jump into this website here that I found that actually has a graph that was created from the test data that Green Glue actually ran, and they used a private lab. So Green Glue paid for this test data, but they didn't actually do it themselves. So hopefully it's not biased towards them. So let's take a quick look at that, because this will give you some more scientific evidence across the frequency spectrum of which is actually better. All right, so we are here now on this website which is buyinstllationproductstore.com. I have no affiliate with these people whatsoever. I just thought that they had one of the better scientific graphs explaining the difference between green glue, a reference assembly, and the MLV versus limply hung, or the MLV as a sandwich. So let me just go over what this is real quick. So I'm going to scroll up here. You can see that the MLV sandwich, and this gives you a better idea of how it looks, is that you would have drywall, MLV, your stud with some insulation in between, another layer of MLV, and then drywall on the outside. It says it has an STC rating of 51, which is pretty good for soundproofing. STC ratings, I could talk about in a different video, or you can look it up real quick. And then they talked about this limply hung, which I believe means it wasn't stretched fully. It's just sort of limp in there. And it has 2 layers of drywall on each side there. So slightly different. This is kind of an interesting thing. I'm kind of looking at the MLV sandwich versus the 2 tubes of green glue. This was drywall layer, green glue, drywall layer, your studs, insulation, and then the same thing on the other side, drywall, green glue, and drywall. So that's our comparison right there. Let's look at this graph real quick, because this is kind of interesting. So you can see we've got frequencies on the bottom here. So low frequencies in that 40 to 160 range is where like a lot of your bass, kick drums, subwoofers, things like that. This area right here is something of concern for home studios. As we go up, this only goes up to 5,000 hertz, which is pretty not really high enough for also home studios. We have a lot of information in the 10,000 hertz range that is really important. So anyways, let's just take a look at this graph. So the green glue is green. If we look at the low range, the green glue really outperforms everything else in this crucial range, which is where a lot of your bass is happening. And that's a big factor. If you look at the limply hung, it's not doing very well. The sandwich is a little bit better, but still not great. In fact, actually just the reference assembly, which I don't think they showed it, but I think the reference assembly is just a normal wall, is actually even performing a little better there. As you jump up here around 100 to 125 hertz, it looks like the limply hung suddenly does a lot better. And the MLV sandwich also does better there. But then clearly the green glue kind of does a lot better in this range, which is pretty significant if you ask me. This is the transmission loss in decibels over here. So, losing 50, 60 decibels of transmission loss is very significant. If we look over here in our bass range, you'll notice that you're only losing 20 to 30, which is because bass frequencies are just massive and they're extremely hard to stop. So that's going to be true with any soundproofing assembly. And then as you go up into the 5,000 hertz range, you're not going to hear birds chirping. You're not going to hear any leaves, any rain, anything like that up in this range here. So again, the green glue seems to do a lot better. The MLV sandwich does okay here, and then it's sort of, a little bit worse. So overall, looking at this graph, I would say the green glue assembly definitely outperforms the MLV sandwich and the MLV limply hung, and obviously the reference assembly. So again, another plus for green glue. So there you have just sort of that. Again, I want to say that they had a note, all testing and charts were published by the Green Glue Company. Testing was performed by an independent lab. The brand of mass-loaded vinyl used in the test is not disclosed. So this is, this is some interesting information that you can factor into your decision to use green glue versus mass-loaded vinyl. So now let's look at which I would recommend and go back over some of the pros and cons. So first off, we realize that mass-loaded vinyl is technically a little bit cheaper by 11 cents, but really not that big of a difference overall. So roughly the cost is the same, for better or for worse. In terms of installation, I would say that mass-loaded vinyl is probably a lot easier to install than the green glue and the 2 layers of drywall. The main reason being that if you're just unrolling the mass-loaded vinyl and then stapling it up or using a nail gun to install your mass-loaded vinyl on the wall, you could probably do that in a couple of hours, whereas green glue and the extra layer of drywall requires a ton of strength. The drywall is extremely heavy. It required 3 people for us to do the ceiling as well as the side walls, and the green glue is kind of sticky and messy and requires a lot of water and cleaning the gun and all these type of things. So overall, I would say one of the cons to doing the green glue method is that it is more work and kind of messier. So that is a pro for mass loaded vinyl. And then to the ultimate question, which is better at soundproofing, I would probably venture to say that the green glue and the 2 layers of drywall ultimately will give you better results than the mass loaded vinyl. This isn't to say that mass loaded vinyl is far off. In fact, if you did have a slightly lower budget and you like the ease of use of mass loaded vinyl, then I would say give it a shot. But just know that you might not get the same results as if you did the double wall with the air gap and the 2 layers of drywall like I did in my studio. If I had to do it all over again, I would probably still do what I did when I built my studio, considering the cost is about the same. Like I said, overall, I would recommend the green glue and the 2 layers of drywall over mass loaded vinyl. It's a super close comparison. I was surprised at how close they actually were, but at the end of the day, you might as well just pick the one that performs better on the weight side and the frequency spectrum side like we looked at in that graph. Even though it's a little bit more work, I think it's well worth it. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and gleaned some information that might help you decide whether you want to use mass loaded vinyl versus green glue and that extra layer of drywall. Again, if you're interested in taking a deeper dive, if this video kind of went over your head in a couple places, definitely check out my free soundproofing course and make sure to subscribe and like this video so you know when I have future videos every week on Mondays. So until next week, I hope you all are well, and I'll see you later.